Well, good morning, everyone. I'll give you a few minutes here for everyone to join us. We are really excited to have you join us today for our first in our series, our spring series this morning. We have some great presenters to go over some wonderful content for you today. So I would like to introduce myself. I am Catherine Stanley. I am the AirTAP program coordinator here at the Center for Transportation Studies. So before we get started, I wanted to just introduce you to AirTAP and then a little tutorial on what Zoom is, if you're new to Zoom. So first off, welcome to our Education Spring Series for 2001. This workshop series is sponsored by MnDOT's Office of Aeronautics and administered by the Airport Technical Assistance Program at the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota. So AirTAP began in 2000. It is the first of its kind in the nation to provide practical yet specialized training and resources across the state for those who operate, maintain, and administer Minnesota's public use airports. Minnesota's general aviation personnel across the state have had access to targeted information and training to reduce costs and improve the safety, quality, and the overall efficiency of airport operations. AirTAP also helps airport staff build a community network for exchanging best practices and learning from each other. So AirTAP provides 4 major service categories. One is education and training, and that's what we're doing today, but we also do an Airports 101 series. We also provide technical assistance, access to experts, and we provide a variety of resources, both web-based and printed materials on our website. So again, welcome. This is the first of 8 trainings in our series. As you can see, they're all listed here. We will be recording them all, and they'll be posted on our website, so you can view them later or share them with someone who was unable to attend today, the live sessions. And when it comes to the Zoom, this is the meeting platform, so when I stop sharing, you actually get to see everyone else who's in it. But on the left-hand side of your ribbon on the bottom is the mute button. So everyone is muted. You can unmute yourself during the Q&A if you'd like to communicate with the presenters directly. You can share your video if you'd like as well. Again, here's the participants. You can view all the participants. Chat, we are encouraging you to submit questions in the chat box as you think of them. We are allowing time at the end to address the questions. And again, if you have anything that you think of that you want others to know about, feel free to share it in the chat box. There's big green is share screen. You won't have to use that. Again, this is being recorded. And if you feel free to use reactions as well throughout the training. So that is it for me. Again, I'm Catherine Stanley, and again, welcome. We are so excited to have everyone here today. And our moderator is Melissa Underwood.
Thanks, Catherine. Welcome everyone to the AirTAP session for today. My name is Melissa Underwood. I'm an airport planner with SEH, and I'll be here to moderate the session, help get your questions to our presenters. And I'd like to start by introducing our 2 presenters today, and then we would like to hold questions until the end of the presentation because they're both kind of covering different elements of this topic. So our first speaker today is Eric Peltier. He is with MnDOT Aeronautics. He's been flying around Minnesota for the Air Force and MnDOT since 2005. He earned his private pilot's license in Duluth, Minnesota back in 1984. He went through the Air Force ROTC at UMD and was in the Air Force active duty from 1990 to 2010 and retired in April of 2010. He taught pilot training for the Air Force for 3 years, but was airframe was on the C-130. He has a year tour in Iraq as an air advisor to the Iraq Air Force and oversaw flight and ground safety as well as chief of standardizations. He's flown worldwide from counter drug in South and Central Americas, Asian theater, Alaska theater, Middle East. He's an evaluator and instructor for the Air Force and currently flies for MnDOT as a pilot. They fly anyone that works for the state, from the governor to the safety inspectors. And he did state airport and hospital heliport inspections for safety compliance with MnDOT. Our second presenter today is Kurt Clausen. Kurt graduated from the University of North Dakota with a bachelor's degree in aviation administration. He received a commercial pilot's license with an instrument rating while at UND. He started with the Rochester International Airport in 1990 and was promoted to his current position of Deputy Airport Director in 1991. He's a past chairman and currently serving on the Minnesota Council of Airports Board of Directors and is a member of the American Association of Airport Executives. So I'd like to welcome our two speakers for their presentations today, and I will turn it over to Eric.
Okay, can you hear me, Melissa? Okay.
Yep, you're good.
All right, I've got my presentation up. Just want to verify that you can see that okay also?
Yep, we can see your presentation.
Great. All right, again, I would also like to welcome everybody that's taken their time out of the day for this training. I know we probably have some new people and old people, and also understand we may even have some people from other states and around the country. So welcome everybody to this. And again, thank you for taking the time to get some more education. So today we've been asked to look at and talk about maintenance operations from a pilot's perspective. And I guess the tone really that we would like to throw out here is that pilots rely heavily on you as airport managers and operators to relay information to us so that we can make safe decisions in our flying processes. And so that's kind of the theme of what we're going to look at this presentation from what I'm going to be giving. And then Kurt is going to be giving you some good information on actually maintenance operations and snow removal specifically. So those are the kind of themes that you should be seeing. Kurt will relay in some more on what he specifically is going to be hitting. But from my area, we're looking at pilot's perspective on what you have going on and how you report that to us to make our decision process easier and smarter and safer. So things we're going to look at today that can really affect us from flying are fuel, not only is availability, but are your pumps working, your trucks working. We'll look at lighting, talk a little bit about PAPIs and VASIs, your runway lights, wildlife issues at your airport, whether it's waterfowl, deer, or maybe farm animals, construction and things that can go wrong with that. So work in progress NOTAMs that you put out for mowing and snow removal. Surface conditions, looking at wet runways, especially after yesterday's storms that rolled through Minnesota. We could have wet pooling water on the runways, and depending where you are in the state, snow and ice came with that, snow banks, wind blow rows again. And then how those affect our ability to safely operate on your runway. So when you feed us that information, we're looking at the new runway condition assessment matrix that came out from the FAA in 2016. And how to use that. We'll just again kind of summarize, thinking about after you hear some of these subjects, are you prepared? Are you ready with your ground operations training? Do you know how to report the knowledge that you're getting at your airports? And then emphasize one more time how much we need your help. So the first item today we're looking for is fuel. So fuel is obviously very critical for flying. If we don't have it, the plane doesn't fly very well. So everything we do is based on how much we have, how much we need for requirements from the FAA to make safe flights, how much we have to land with so that we have a reserve in case we have a problem. So when we're planning our trips, we're really looking at the fuel. And if you have a NOTAM out there that says your fuel is not available, whether it's a truck or maybe a pump, if your truck's not working and maybe we just need to know that we have to pull up by your pump, your pumps aren't working or you're out of fuel or low on fuel. By publishing that information, that lets us know that maybe we're in addition to just seeing the NOTAM, we're going to call you to see if there's any clarification on it. And your NOTAM may say we're low on fuel, contact airport manager. So if you have something like that, we would know maybe you have enough left for us to pick up or not. It's really hard for us if we land at the airport and our first notification of if you have problems with the fuel, whether it's a card reader or the pump itself is out, is if there's a note on it and we had no other information. An airplane flying in may not have enough fuel to continue on to where they normally would need to get their next stop for fuel. And it may hamper their operations, or they may be stopping just simply for a fuel stop because it was the most convenient en route, and now their passengers are going to be late for their meeting because now the pilot has to take off and try to find another location to get some fuel. If we know ahead of time, and you provide us with that in the NOTAMs, again, we are able to then plan for that problem, and we may be able to, if we can carry the extra weight, tanker in some fuel or land at a nearby airports in lieu of landing at your airport. So it's not that we don't want to come there, but we just need to know that information ahead of time so that we can plan better and safer and not get stuck or potentially run out of fuel or cause delays. Lighting issues, it happens at every airport. Heck, it happens on the highways. So broken runway lights, they can happen from either mowers, sometimes airplanes deviate, somebody's doing a runway check, they clip the lights, plows in the wintertime, you get a good snowstorm, all the lights get buried, it's hard to see where the edge of the runway is, but it happens. So if you have major issues with the lights out, we'd like to know that. Of course, in Minnesota and the northern climates here, we have problems all winter long with frost heaves. And you can see here how no matter how hard we try to put the pylons down in the ground in a way that they, and all the soil is so different around the state that, we're trying different things everywhere. But they get pushed up and they get out of alignment, or sometimes even the connectors get broken. So, and that can lead to moisture or rodents or other things getting into some of the things. And so it leads to problems. But more so, even like if the PAPIs are pushed up and out of alignment, the PAPIs are there for aircraft to fly and guide them in at night. So when we can't see the runway and it's just sort of a black hole out in the countryside, the PAPIs give the pilots a visual clue to how am I coming down? Am I approaching the airport at a safe angle? And if for some reason they get pushed up by frost and it doesn't trigger them to turn off, and you note on your report as you're doing your airport inspection that, hey, these are out of alignment. If we don't get that information, we may try to fly in there and fly on that PAPI for that visual portion to the landing. And as you can see in the photos here as an example, the cockpit sits up higher than your gear as you're flying into land. And so your gear could be drug in through treetops, or maybe you end up landing short the beginning end of the runway and damaging your gear as you come into land. So it may not seem like much, but just something as simple as the PAPIs being knocked out of alignment can cause big problems for somebody that's not familiar with the airport and or coming in at night and has no other glide path guidance, such as an approach. Lights out of service, if you for some reason, who knows, maybe a gopher eats your wiring on one side and your system's designed that only that side got knocked out and it didn't trigger the whole thing to get knocked out. So you notice that you only have half your runway lights working. It's most important to just turn them all off and then note them out of service until you're able to get them fixed. If you let the system operate with only half of them running, and a pilot didn't know that, when they're coming in, they're not going to necessarily know which side of the lights the runway's on. They could land on the wrong side and land off the runway and hit obstructions. Additionally, taxiway lights, something as simple as that, may not think much of it, but from a pilot's perspective, we use those a lot of times, taxiways, when we're looking at an airport diagram and we say, okay, we need this much runway to stop and we should expect to turn off at this point. And or when we pass that taxiway, we've got half the runway left to still stop. If they're not lit, we're expecting them to be lit, then we miss those visual cues that we're trying to rely on in our planning stages for a safe landing. And, odds are we'll probably still do a safe landing, but it's just going to all of a sudden, add a little extra stress in the cockpit at the last minute as we're trying to figure out, okay, how much runway is remaining? Because a lot of the airports in the state don't have runway remaining markers on them. So we're really relying on those visual clues to see how much we actually have left until we get to the end of the runway where the lights take over again. Wildlife, whether it's waterfowl or animals, create a great hazard for aircrafts. And we obviously know that there's going to be bird activity everywhere all the time. It's just a matter of when you notice that you have an increase in bird activity, we're looking for that. If you know that you have a farm near your airport and the farmer, isn't doing a good job of containing their animals, those are kind of things that we like to know. It's non-standard stuff. We know that there's probably going to be animals, and we're always alert for animals and birds. But if you know that you've got a heightened area of concern, whether it's migratory birds or a farm nearby that they're getting out all the time, and you're doing your best to work with that farmer to contain them, we want to know that information. Birds and animals have done a lot of damage to aircraft. They bring down aircraft. They've severely damaged aircraft. You know, we have many crashes, whether they're on the ground or in the air. We know, everybody probably remembers the airliner losing both engines to birds and crashing in the river and ditching. So very fortunate to have water to ditch on. You know, we lost a big airplane in Alaska and everybody on it because they didn't have something soft to land in and landed into the train. And it was because of geese. They took out both engines on one side. So these are just some photos just to emphasize that, you know, animals can be very dangerous to airplanes and the people on them. So if you have something that's out of the ordinary, that's what we're looking for. We recognize that you're probably going to have animals and birds nearby. That's okay. Construction. We found that in Minnesota, you know, most of our airports, we really can't say that anytime you're doing construction, you guys are reporting it. So for the most part, you're doing a very good job of letting everybody know that there's something going on in your airport, whether you're doing runway construction, painting, and or you have equipment on the runway. The problem can run into is if the construction project gets delayed or runs a little bit long and your contractor that's supposed to be working on that and putting the NOTAMs out for it doesn't recognize that, oh, the NOTAM that you did put out for the whole of the runway has expired. That NOTAM goes away, and at which point now, if we were just looking at the NOTAM and I'm not familiar with the airport knowing that something was going on, I'm traveling in from out of state, and there's absolutely nothing to indicate any construction. So if you have projects going on and they happen to run long, that's probably a big cue for, you know, as an airport operator to make sure that your contractors are keeping those NOTAMs up to date. And that if they expire, that they're putting them back in until the project is complete. We have landed, and fortunately no runway problems, but we've landed at airports where taxiways have been removed and or ramps were no longer there, and there was absolutely no indication in the NOTAM system for that. So sometimes we are surprised, but for the most part, do a great job. That's why it's critical. Here's an example of a night landing where a runway section was missing. And of course, during the day, it would be obvious they wouldn't try to land here, but it was at night and with minimal lighting. And we were unable to see that there was a hole in the runway, and it absolutely destroyed the aircraft. So again, typically not a problem, but if a NOTAM expires, it could, for the unsuspecting person that comes from out of state and is unfamiliar with the construction process going on, this could be the result. Work in progress, mowing. When you put a work in progress NOTAM out there, whether it's snow removal, construction, or mowing, that just gives us that heightened awareness that, hey, there could be equipment there. So in this particular case, when we're looking at work in progress with mowing, we know that you're going to have equipment, probably not on the runway unless it's a grass runway. But we know that there's going to be stuff nearby the runway and or the taxiway. So we're going to be much more vigilant in watching out for that stuff. The two photos on the right here in the bottom are actually grass runways. And unfortunately, both of these cases, the mower was actually hit by the airplane. Part of the problem when on the grass is if they're not monitoring the radio, they don't know that the airplane's coming in. And these two types of aircraft in these accidents, if you notice that they're both were what's called tail draggers, where it's got the two primary wheels in the forward section on the wing, and then once it touches down, the tail actually has its own wheel in the back of the airplane. Once they do that, it creates a huge blind spot in front of the airplane, and they're unable to see the mower, even though it's right in front of them, because it's hidden by the cowling of the nose. So a lot of times when you see the tail draggers taxiing out, they kind of S-turn as they're going along so they can see around that engine cowl. But when they come into lands, they're trying to keep the airplane straight. They can't afford to be turning back and forth. So they touch down, and once they touch down, that blind spot's there, and they just didn't see these mowers at all. Very unfortunate. And you know, using the radios, excuse me, this particular one in the bottom actually had a radio, but had a problem with the mower. And unfortunately, it had stopped to work on the mower. A friend came up with a pickup truck and they were talking. So he'd taken the headset off, didn't realize that the airplane was coming in, and the airplane impacted the mower because they were choosing to work on it on the runway. So there's, excuse me. There's always the potential out there for an accident that you didn't see coming. And using the radios is a great way to help make sure that this type of stuff doesn't happen. So with that in mind, I'd like to open up our first poll questions. Are you personnel at your airport trained on how to use the radio when at the airport? And does your airport have dedicated snow removal and lawn mowing equipment? Or do you share that equipment with the city? If you do share the city equipment, do the plow drivers know not to use salt at the airport? And Kurt's going to get into some more of the stuff with that later, so we'll get some more details on salt. And Catherine's going to summarize what we got there. So as
We'll give you guys another 20 seconds to answer these 3 questions, and then I will end the polling and then share the results.
And don't worry about if you don't know. The point of these polls is not, do you know, do you not know? It's about figuring out where maybe we can help with education in the future. So we're asking these questions to help you. What information can maybe we need to have more training sessions on, or offer up training in areas. So education is why we're doing this.
And the polling is anonymous, so
yes,
to hit no and submit. That is your answer. I see we haven't. Okay, well, I'm just going to go ahead and end the polling. Okay, and you should be able to see the results right now.
Wow, that's great. So we have a large portion, obviously great results of those that reported know how to use the radios and are using the radios. That's awesome. Airports have dedicated snow removal. A very large portion have that. We have a small portion here that are sharing, so that's important. And so thinking about the salt and stuff is very important there. And so that's where Kirk can bring in some of those things on question 3. If you share that equipment, again, do they know not to use the salt? So we'll get into that. But again, this is for education and where we can help you guys out on some of these topics. So we're just asking them, and feel free to answer honestly. Again, they are anonymous. So. Okay, with that in mind, snow removal, again, you have a work in progress NOTAM that you have to put out. One of the things though, if you're fortunate enough to have one of these beasts, a big blower versus just having to plow everything. One thing to be careful out there is not bury your AWAS towers also as you're doing this. When you're throwing the snow, be careful where you're throwing the snow. That can give erroneous readings. It just puts enough moisture and things in the air around the AWAS and or can damage the AWAS machines. Then as we're flying in, your weather system will then report erroneous information about what's actually happening at the airport. And we've even seen that from a strobe light, what a maintenance vehicle parked next to one of the AWAS machines, and the strobe light affected it. We were flying, it was absolutely beautiful weather, and center says, hey, they're reporting less than a quarter-mile visibility, and we're like, that's impossible, because we can see the airport from here and we're 30 miles away. So, and it just turned out to be a construction vehicle that was there. So just one extra careful thing when you're doing that. And then again, work in progress snow removal, that tells us that there's going to be equipment more than likely on one of the moving surfaces, so either the runway or the taxiway or the ramps. So we're even more vigilant than the mowers are out there because we know you're going to be on the surface that we're going to be using. Again, yesterday storms came rolling through. I'm just south of the cities, and we had a lot of rain, several tornado warnings, and different parts of the state got hit with slush and freezing rain and snow. But water pooling can be very detrimental to the aircraft. So when you report those conditions to us, that really helps us out. If you know that your airport has a specific spot that needs fixing, maybe in a runway where it does pool, please put that NOTAM up for us. We don't have anti-lock brakes on most of the aircraft that fly around. Only the larger ones have that. So unlike your car, we don't have that extra stability or any of that stuff. It's all in our feet. And once we lose control of the regular surfaces, it's really down to our feet and being able to steer and or brake. And any water can really, at our high speeds that we're operating, can lead to poor braking, losing control, or maybe even sliding off and overrunning the end of the runway, as you can see an example on the bottom. So reporting those surface conditions, even wet or that really helps us out in determining, can we safely use your runway today? Other contaminants that might be on the runway would be snow and ice. Again, especially here in Minnesota, we deal with this all winter long, and it's going to be there. So we're just asking you to let us know how much is there. We'll get into that with the chart here shortly. And additionally, when you're doing your snow clearing, after you get your, you got your snow and ice control plan, and you've got your primary runways cleared, your taxiways cleared, make sure that your signage is not blocked again. The local pilots will probably know where to go, probably not a big deal, but again, you get your transient pilot that may fly in from Illinois or somewhere else, and they're looking for these signs to tell them where they're supposed to be operating on runway, especially at night. They're looking for the reflectivity as their lights pass by to say, hey, where do I need to go to get to the spot, the parking spot or the FBO. So report these contaminants, and then make sure you're also please clearing the signs from. That's what we're looking for. Consequences, of slippery surfaces, and this happens to pilots at all levels, inexperienced to extremely experienced. Misinterpreting or maybe not getting the information, it's hard to say what happens in every one of these situations, but we obviously know that snow and ice was involved, and can slide off the runway, slide over the end of the runways, slide into snowbanks, or clip a snowbank. And so these are the consequences of landing on or attempting to land or use these slippery surfaces. So the more information that we have, the better decisions we can make to hopefully maybe prevent this stuff from happening in the future. It's not foolproof, but it gives us a leg up. A story for you on that is we had a slide and go. And so this particular case, it was an airport in northern Minnesota, and we had a trip planned for it. We were supposed to bring some people to this. We were going to have cars waiting for them, and then they had to travel up about another 25 miles to do an inspection. And it was the closest airport to where they needed to do the work, and so that was why we chose it. We did have a good alternate that was further away, and so we used that as our backup plan. But we attempted contact with the airport manager. We were unable to make contacts via phone messages and emails. And there were no snow events leading up in the few days prior to us going on this trip. And the day of the trip, it was absolutely beautiful weather. So the other crew member and I planned the trip. We did our due diligence to try to make contact. We looked at the NOTAMs, and there were no NOTAMs indicating any contaminants on the runway. So if you don't say that you have something on the runway, the FAA defaults that to there's nothing on it. So that was our perspective going in. However, we do know that there's still a chance that there is something on the runway. So we have our backup plan to go to the other airport. This particular day, the weather was absolutely beautiful. We fly up there. We elect to go with it. It's calm winds, it's daylight, blue skies. We're landing with the sun. And as we approach the airport, we can see that there is appears of some snow on the runway. So we're starting, well, it would, it wasn't in the NOTAMs, but it looks like it's snow, and it looks like it's plowed, and it's open. So we like to come in and land. And when we touch down, as we get down and touch down, we realize looking forward that it's a lot more of a glassy surface looking than just snow. And I gently touch the brakes, and there's absolutely no braking action. So immediately elect to not try to stop, because if we did, we probably wouldn't slide off the end. If we did stop, we wouldn't be able to legally take off. So we do a go around, we climb up out of there, and we divert to our alternate airport. Ultimately, everything worked out okay for us. We were able to maintain direction control with the flight controls on the airplane and fly away safely, diverted safely. It did add about 2.5 hours of drive time for our passengers, and we had to get some rental cars for them. So it added a lot of inconvenience, and there was a great potential that we could have slid off the runway and hit a snowbank. Unfortunately, nothing happened. The follow-up, though, we did try with the airport manager, and it was, I guess, with the aviation community, we call it like a hazardous attitude and it was unfortunate. And this is why we were really trying to help make sure that the information gets out there. When he made contact with us, he said, well, it's winter, it's northern Minnesota. This is what you should expect. This is the way it is all winter long. So that's why I don't put a note on it for it. And we're like, well, yes, that's your airport, you fly there, and you fly your single engine, as he mentioned to us. By single engine doesn't have any direction control problems. And so we told him, well, what about twins? And again, it's not just you in your airports, you got to think about all the pilots that might be flying airplanes in from Florida or Texas that have no idea how this is working, and getting that information. So you need to share the information for the lowest common denominator. And that's the person that's not familiar with your airport or familiar with northern Minnesota. So if you don't have something published, they expect it to be in good condition. So that's why we really, really look for you to publish stuff. So poll question number 4 is where this leads into. Are you familiar with the RCAM, which is the Runway Condition Assessment Matrix? And this came out in 2016. And do you issue RCCs when your runway is contaminated? And this is something that, again, this is newer over the last several years, getting the word out there, and pilots are learning about it as well. So if this isn't something that you do know about, we're hopefully opening up a little bit to why you should know about this, and why hopefully you will understand why we need the information after we get done.
We'll give it about another 15 seconds here for people to answer, and then we will close the poll and share the results. Okay, I'm closing. And there you go. There's the results.
That's really good. An 84% of you out there know about RCAMs and issue RCCs. That's really, really good. We see we need a little bit more work there, and maybe the 16% that are unfamiliar are brand new. And hopefully that's the case. So maybe this is your first introduction to it. And that's why we're here. So this next section that we're going to go into is going to be on about the RCAM and how it affects us. So you know that you need to issue regular NOTAMs. When you issue something about the runway, though, you're actually issuing it as what's called a field condition NOTAM or a FICON. So when we refer to FICON, that's telling us what is the condition of the runway. And a FICON NOTAM is actually broken down into a runway condition code, an RCC. So you'll see we have the RCAM, which is the matrix, the FICON, which reports ultimately the RCC, which comes from the RCAM. So I know it's kind of confusing, but here's a chart to make it a little bit easier. On the left-hand side is really for the airport operators. And this is the description area. So if you have a contaminant on your runway, you're going to look to see if you have one of these contaminants on the left-hand side. And you're going to look at your runway in thirds. And so you're going to look at the approach end, the midsection, and then the departure end. And by breaking it up into thirds, you're going to look to see if any one of those thirds has 25% or more coverage of any one of these contaminants. If it does, you are required to report that. And so with that information, then it standardizes the process. It makes it easier because you just have to look at the thing and say, which one of these contaminants is it and how much is it? And is there a temperature associated with it that might be a problem? Once you do that, you either call up flight service and have it published that way, or put it into NOTAM Manager, and it kicks out the RCC code, which is that middle section, and 0 being the worst, we don't operate there, through dry of 6, and normally not required to do that unless there's other issues. So we're usually going to only see 1 through 5s on there. But then what that gives is, if, for instance, say you had the approach end of your runway had a lot of landings and you've got a lot of rubber buildup. And so when it rains, it's considered slippery when wet. And so if we look in the middle here, we see that slippery when wet actually gets an RCC code of 3. Then as the pilots, we know that if I see an RCC of 3, I can expect, this is my expectation when I land there, that my braking deceleration is going to be noticeably reduced and my direction control is going to be noticeably reduced. So I'm probably going to be lowering my crosswind limits so I don't get blown off your runway. And I'm going to make sure that I have adequate runway available and where I should be doing my braking at. So that's the expectation that we can get when you see a contaminant and publish an RCC code. So that's sort of the process. You see a problem, you put it in the system, it spits out a code, we see the code, and then we can plan for it. And that's why we need your help with this one, so we can plan safely. Here's a couple of examples of what an RCAM driven NOTAM would look like. And when you go into the charts, your field condition NOTAM for that runway, you can see here in the first one, we have a 5, 5, and a 5. So each third of the runway is the same. And this particular case, they all have the exact same contaminant, 50%, which is greater than 25, of the runway is covered with 1/8 inch dry snow. Knowing from the chart, braking action with a 5 is still good. So we know we're going to have good braking when we land there. However, I shouldn't be surprised to see snow on the runway. By you putting this icon out, I would see that I should expect to see some snow on the runway, but the braking action should be good. The second example, we see a 5, 3, and 5. Now this particular one, we see we got a different contaminant in the middle there with 50% 1/8 wet snow over compacted snow, which is bringing that code down to a 3. So as a pilot, I would say, well, I'm going to land in that first third. So I want to use good braking action in that first third, because as I roll into the middle of your runway, my braking action is going to be noticeably reduced. So I want to take advantage of that first third. And I can also note that if I, for some reason, wasn't able to slow the airplane down well in that area, be careful not to skid a tire, because again, we don't have anti-lock brakes, that I do have good braking again at the departure end of the runway. So I will do my best to use my first portion, ease off a little bit through the midsection so I don't skid a tire. And then if I need more, I still have good braking at the end. The third example, we see we have a 3 at the beginning, a 5, and a 2. So where I touch down, I got to be careful not to skid a tire. But then in the meat of the runway, the middle of it, I have good braking. So that's where I really want to be proactive and slow the airplane down in that section. And with only a 2 at the departure end, I really want to take advantage of that, because I don't want to get into the end with any high speed and energy to get rid of, because my braking action down there is going to be poor. So, and you can see in that last section that we have 10% of 1/4 inch slush over ice and 75% 1/4 inch slush. So that's why it's ending up at 2. So that's how when you put a FICON out and it reports through the different sections, that's how we can just in general picture look and say, how can we apply that information to how we're going to fly our airplane into your runway? So it gives us our expected braking action by looking at that. But we can do more. The FAA has also provided us with more information that we can use to actually determine, is the runway long enough for us? And these are highly recommended procedures, not mandated procedures, that came out from the FAA, and they resulted from airliners overrunning runways and people getting killed. And they recognized that the manufacturers and the system that we had in place wasn't adequate to tell pilots how much runway they really needed for the aircraft to stop. A lot of manufacturers just don't provide data for slippery surfaces or any contaminants on the runway. So they're only giving you dry information. So we're going to look at an example today. We chose a King Air, and we're going to say this King Air is 12,000 pounds. It's a nice day at your airport. It's 0 degrees Celsius in the winter. And overnight, you know that it snowed, and you get out to your airport to do a airport check, and you notice that you've got 3/4 inches of dry snow on the runway. Not a huge deal, but you know, King Airs use your airport regularly. Maybe we use your airport regularly. So we want to see is, can this King Air today get in there safely, knowing that we would be able to use this place regularly? So we would look at, you would look at your RCAM charts, and you would look for the contaminants, look for the depth of that contaminant. So we'll go ahead and again, for RCAM of 3 is what we come up with. I'll blow this up for you so you can see it a little bit better. You noted that you had 3/4 inch of dry snow. So that's greater than this 1/8, which then puts you down here in the RCC of 3. So then as the pilots, we'll see that code posted, and we know that we got, again, noticeably reduced braking and directional control, and we would consider it medium braking. So the new information, the extra information that we got now, though, is the FAA says, if you have this as a turboprop, you should be taking your ground roll and multiplying it times 2.4, and that's really how much distance you're going to need for your landing. And this is the chart that they generated that from. So we as a King Air would fall under this turboprop note 1, and we see that here's your RCC code of 3 medium, and that we need to multiply our ground roll by 2.4 times. So that's a pretty significant amount for a contaminant on the runway. No, I do want to note that This does include from the approach end of the runway, your flare and the runway that you're not touching down on. So this is your flare out also that's incorporated into these distances. As you can see here, even on a dry runway, you multiply your ground roll times 1.67, and that's to account the safety factor for as you fly in, round out, touch down, and then break. So how does that affect us in a king air? If you were to look at an accelerate stop distance for the airplane, and again, this is the best practice from the FAA's recommendation. It is not mandated, but if you're applying the best practice, you would say accelerate stop, and that is a if you're not familiar with the term, accelerate stop is it's a distance that is calculated for the aircraft to accelerate, to take off speed, lose an engine, and then stop. That is the total distance of that process. You then compare that distance to the actual runway available. So in this case, we have a 4,000-foot runway available today. We would go into our chart at the top at 0 degrees. We come down to our 12,000-pound aircraft, and we note our RCC code of 3. By bringing all those together, it says that with a contaminated runway of a RCC of 3, you would need 4,143 feet to accelerate and stop. And so today, that would be over the length of the runway. If it was a dry runway, all day long, we could do that because it only needs 3,450 feet. But with the contaminant on there, you can see that it would technically bring us off the end of the runway if we had to do a high speed abort. So we would not want to do that. If we were landing or we had to come around for an emergency land, same thing, we can check that out. So we would look at 0 degrees, 12,000 pounds, and 3, we need 4,088 feet. So by the FAA's guidance, if we were trying to land here, there's good chance that if we didn't do everything right, we're probably going to slide off the end of the runway. Not by much, but we would probably not make it. Again, dry runway all day long, 2,800 feet. So not a big deal. So for us, for planning this king air today, what we would be looking for when you provide us that information, we would say that we really need 4,100 feet, 4,143. So we'd say probably 4,200 feet would be our minimum runway we're looking for. And that would be our drive one because it's the longer of our takeoff, accelerate, stop, and our landing. And again, normally dry runway, no problem. But today we would either reduce our fuel load, our passenger load to get our weight category down so we can make it better, or we wait for it to be plowed. Or the last option would be to maybe go to a different airport that meets our performance needs that day. So even though we could come in normally in dry conditions, by you issuing that and giving us that information, we're able to safely plan that trip and follow the FAA's best guidance. So other things, when we look at that and get that knowledge out there, we're looking also at the end of all this, what's your experience level with the airport operations? Are you new to it? Are you going to be seasoned? Is this what you do all the time? Do you work at the city and this is something extra for you? Are you familiar with your mowing plan? How do the mowers work? Where do they do it? Is it, again, shared equipment, not shared equipment? Your snow and ice control plan. Where do you put your snowbanks? What's your priorities? If you have multiple runways, which one's your priority runway? Which taxiways do you make sure are plowed first? Where do you put the snow on the ramp? Your fuel farm and your pumps. How often do you share the fuel? Do you get fuel loads that you split with other airports? Maintenance on your pumps, making sure that those things are always ready to go. Fuel samples are done. Personal operations, on the airports. Do your personnel know how to use the radio? It sounds like we've got a pretty good group out there on that from the polls. Have you taken airport manager courses? Have your personnel taken these courses? Are they familiar with the other aspects of operating on the airport? And then do you know how to report by NOTAMs? And are you familiar with NOTAM manager? Which leads us to our next couple of questions. Are you currently using NOTAM manager? And do you know how to look up NOTAMs for your airport? So NOTAM Manager is a new electronic way for you to put stuff in the system. So if you're not using it, we obviously like to get you moved that way. That's where we want everybody to go to. So we're just kind of curious how many of you are using that. And then it's important to know what's happening to your airport. So again, if you have a construction project going on and you know it went wrong, you can follow up to make sure that the contractor is actually updating that NOTAM. So do you know that process to look up NOTAMs at your airport? And Kurt's also going to touch a little bit on the NOTAM manager. And we have in our handouts some links on NOTAM manager and training on the NOTAM manager. So we can connect you with the people that run the system, and they will help you get into the system and walk you through the process to do that. So if you're not on it, we're here to try to help that.
Okay, well, I'm going to end the polling. And there's the results.
Okay, great. That's pretty good. So, that's a pretty high percentage of the people that are on here for the managers that are actually using NOTAM Manager. That's really great. Obviously, we have some out there that aren't using it, and we would love to get you on it and connect you with the people that run that system. So again, in our links and our handout, we have that information. What I really liked is all of you know how to look up airport NOTAMs for your airports and are on top of that. So that's awesome. All right. So, I guess, like I said, we really need your help. Pilots are needy, I guess. We need your help with these items of particular notes that we went through in this slide. And it's not just, we are mandated that we look at these things, and we are. Obviously, the FARs, they spell it out. You must check all available information, and you have to make sure flight is safely planned. You have to look at all the stuff, weather, fuel, takeoff and landing distances. But these NOTAMs that you put out are critical to us being able to collect the proper information. If you don't put out the NOTAMs or the FICONs, we're not getting that critical piece of information that we need to be able to meet those requirements that we have to do. And it's not just to meet the requirements. It's part of us, having the will to live and making sure that our flights are always safely planned and that we aren't surprised by what we see when we show up. So we need your help to make those good decisions, and it's potential for us to be on a long flight. So maybe somebody's flying up again out of Illinois, down to Oklahoma, and they're coming up. They're really looking for you to report this information as soon as you know. They're looking at the weather systems. They kind of know what's going on. So if they see a weather system move through, they're going to be looking to see if you're reporting anything and any results after that. Whether it's work in progress, you're removing snow, rain, wet runways, they're looking for that information so that they can make the best decision. Should they delay the flight? Should they go ahead and take off as if it's okay? And we will continuously try to gather information in flight. So if you keep reporting and updating those, it was wet, but now it's dry, we should be able to get that information en route as we're flying, either on our electronic devices, or the controllers can pass that information to us as we get ready for the approach to come into land or to approach. I showed you the FICONs earlier, some examples of that, where we have the different sections of the runway. Here's just one more look, and we'll just use Rochester. This was just a snapshot in honor of Kurt. But this was from several days ago, obviously, but it just shows you what we look for, what we see when we see the NOTAM. You are all able to look at the NOTAMs for your airports. So again, we're just looking for this raw information and can we safely operate at your airport. So when you put out those other FICONs or NOTAMs of things happening at your airport, this is where we're going to see it. And since you're all familiar with the NOTAMs at the airports, you're probably familiar with what these look like. So the last question we have for you is, not only are you're here doing AirTAP, you're doing education, but MnDOT itself also offers some free education. Have you taken any of this MnDOT training classes, such as airport manager training? It's just one of our e-learning courses. So we're just curious how many of you have partaken in that in addition to the AirTAP that you're doing now.
Okay, we'll give you another 20 seconds and then we'll close the poll. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. There you go. There's the results.
Okay, so I guess this is the part where, how do you feel? Offer up some great training, and you're obviously here at AirTAP getting some fantastic training, and we're going to have several courses over the length of the training period with more specific things. And if you would like some more training, these are just some of the e-learning courses that we have on our website for you. So if you want a little bit more on these things and maybe look at, and you can take them more than once. You can take them as refreshers. You can have other people at your airport take these. These are open to anybody. And tying these things in with what you're getting from AirTAP. Some of this can be some training for the AirTAP topics so that you can maybe have some more knowledge that way. So then maybe be able to answer some more better tailored questions when the training topics come up in AirTAP. But please, we invite you to go to our website, public website, go to Minnesota DOT's, go to Arrow, you'll look for the airplane symbol, operations, airport managers, and references. And again, it's on here. We also have in the handout the websites. So all the information is provided. Don't feel like you have to try to write this down. We've got all the stuff in the handouts that are available for you for this briefing. So, so again, there's lots of sources out there for all this different information. When we look for this, we're looking at accident reports, we're looking at FAA stuff. There's just no one-stop shopping, and that's the hard part about aviation. And we understand that even for the NOTAM system. So that's why, one more time, just want to really emphasize that you are just an incredible important role for us in our safety process by reporting what's happening at your airport. We can make so much better decisions by knowing before we ever, we're at ground speed 0 planning this trip. Before we leave that ground, we know what to expect when we get there. And that's really for pilots, from our perspective, what we really need from you and how you help us make that decision process better and safer. So again, I'd like to hold all questions for this section until after Kurt gets done with his. And with that, Kurt, I will stop sharing and pass it on to you, sir.
Yep. Thank you so much, Eric. That was a wonderful presentation, such valuable information. We are holding questions until the end, but please don't hesitate to put it in the chat box, and we'll be able, especially since they're fresh in your mind, and we'll be able to address them at the end. Some questions may be answered during Kurt's presentation, but don't hesitate to submit those as you think of them.
Does that look right? Are you still see that margin on the left?
Yeah, so you just have to, yep.
Click from the beginning, yeah. Well.
Yep.
Doesn't seem like it wants to do that.
If you just click on the ribbon up there from beginning, that should work.
Yeah, that's what I did though. What this is. Yeah, it's not really doing that for me.
I'll try from current slide.
No. I wonder if it's, I gotta, hang on a second. Let me move this other screen over there. Maybe got to click on the other screen here. Well, that's not working out. Still not working, right?
No.
Okay, well, hang on here. Good thing I only got 20 minutes.
If you want, you can just close your, just stop sharing and then close your PowerPoint and relaunch it to see if it will reset.
All right, let me try that. All right, let me try that. It's like it slowed everything down here a little bit somehow. All right, well, let me try the, maybe I got too many monitors. Maybe that's my problem.
Yeah, try it one more time. Otherwise, I can present your presentation. I'm just pulling it up here.
I think, let's try this one. I think it's because I'm picking the wrong monitor. Honestly. No go?
Did you hit anything?
Do you see anything now?
I see your presentation. It's not in presentation mode though.
But with the wrong margin on the side again?
Yep.
And Kurt, down on your lower right down there, you see
Yeah.
you got a screen up there that's highlighted. 3 to the right of that is a single individual one. Try clicking that one on the lower right.
The lower right of, I got 2 monitors though, the one with
With the one with your, I'm seeing the one that has your slides on the left hand
okay.
side of your presentation portion. So it's a single screen, and that's the slideshow screen. So if you hit that one on the
I can't even get my mouse to go over to that screen now. Let me try. I apologize. I don't know how this is on here. It's on the wrong screen is my problem, I think. So let me stop sharing again if I get my mouse.
Can you drag it over to your other screen?
Well, now I can't even get my mouse to show up on the one screen,
Oh.
so it's kind of a challenge here. Let me try that. All right, so.
Okay, well, I have yours pulled up. Do you want me just to share?
Well, I changed it a little bit. Let me see if I can do it now from this
Okay.
one here. What does that look like?
Just your files.
Oh, really? Oh, that's that. Geez. Okay, let me stop sharing. Let me try another. I think I just got the wrong screen here. If I email it to you, would you get it right now?
I have it. You already emailed it to me.
Yeah, just throw it up there, I guess.
You don't have that many slides, so I'm just gonna go
Yeah,
ahead. and
Go ahead, put it up there. I gotta stop sharing.
I got it. Okay. You guys seeing it?
Yeah, it looks the same as when I had it up there, though. You gotta.
There you go.
All right. Okay.
How's that?
All right. I apologize for all that. Hopefully we still have some people actually listening. So I'm going to talk a little bit about snow and ice control. I mean, Eric did a really nice job, and I think the real advantage, having a pilot on there helps, us with airports and responsible for airports kind of understand what our actions do at an airport and how they affect, those that are using our airport. And I think that's a really important piece. So next slide. So the things I'm going to try to cover today, just some general information about, snow and ice control, talk a little bit about NOTAMs. Obviously, Eric talked a fair amount about those as well. I'll probably give a little more airport perspective. The runway condition assessment matrix, as Eric mentioned, that's been around for about 5 years, kind of a new thing. A little bit about friction testing, pavement friction testing, which is still really important, even though RCAM is, the conditions are not really friction based anymore. They're more contaminant based. And then I'll talk about snow, a little bit about ice. And then I have a slide at the end that just kind of lists some additional resources. Next, please. So, when talking about airfield conditions, one of the things I've learned over the many years I've been doing this is that it's really hard to describe any 2 snow events as being the same. So I would always say, there's never a never and there's never an always. So, as you try to describe to someone how to manage snow and how to manage snow removal, it's challenging because, there's always different variables, whether it's surface temperature, type of precip, wind, air temp, lots of different variables. So you kind of have some generalities that you can follow, but it's hard to have a specific recipe for each and every time. And then one of the things too, that probably the most important thing that you can take out of this session today is to make sure that you're reporting, the runway conditions at your airport as a FICON through the NOTAM system. Whether you're calling that in or doing it through NOTAM Manager, extremely important. And then update your conditions as they change and periodically, even when they don't change. So if you've had a 1/4 inch of wet snow on your runway for 2 weeks, I'm not sure why you'd have that, but if you did, keep it updated so that it looks updated to the pilots that are coming in. They can see that, hey, this thing was updated 3 hours ago or 2 hours ago. And then, one of the things that makes it challenging for me to present at something like this is I realize that each and every airport has different operational needs. So, what's different for Rochester, what's good for Rochester is not the same as Minneapolis, not the same as Dodge Center. So, our operational needs, whether it's air carriers, air ambulance services, a 24/7 tenant or any other type of activity, they generally drive the winter weather response at airports, and they're all different. So it's hard to put together a part of a presentation that makes sense for everybody. So hopefully you'll be able to kind of pull some bits and pieces from this, and certainly call me or email me if you have questions. I'll be more than happy to help. So again, the higher operational needs, at an airport require more resources that can be focused on the airfield. Next, please. So, talking about notices to airmen, Eric did a nice job and more in depth than I'm going to go on it. But, note a manager, it makes it much, much easier for, you to manage the conditions of your field. It's a little bit of a learning curve. But I can tell you, once you get, accustomed to it, it's much easier. I think, when we signed up, there was a practice site that we could practice on, and it's great for new employees that we still use. And then there's a production site that you obviously don't want to practice on. So it's very easy once we get into it. But and obviously one of the most important features of that is reporting your field conditions. It's a huge responsibility, and I would tell you that it's a liability in the sense that if you don't report them, the example that Eric gave, and I'm not trying to be critical of anybody, but I can't help but think that if you don't report conditions that are less than bare and dry, that if there's an accident at your airport in today's world, again, not an attorney, but I would hate to be in that position where now I'm trying to defend an airport that didn't report conditions and there was an aircraft accident on their airport. So and I'll tell you too that you got to realize that pilots have a lot at stake, their careers at stake. So any little incident that happens on an airport, generally, and this is my experience, is generally they're going to try to blame it on the field conditions. And I don't mean that to sound bad, but they have a lot at stake. So you need to do what you can do to make sure that you can support, the conditions that you reported. That might be pictures, that might be anything, but keep that in mind. Now, one thing the FICON system has done when it went to the new system is it changed from a friction-based system, which we used to report MEWS, and those have been around for more than 5-6 years. We remember that we reported MEWS on runways, and we don't do that anymore. It's contaminant-based versus friction-based, and any contaminant other than dry results in a runway condition code. And those codes expire in 24 hours. Now, I would, I got a chart on there as well that I'll show, but one thing I think to keep in mind and try to simplify a little bit for the airport guys out there is if you report your contaminant, the system will all automatically spit out the runway condition code if it needs to. So you don't really have to worry about what the number is other than understanding what it means to those that are using your airport. So, you put the condition that you see and you observe, and it's going to spit out that code if it needs to. One of the things that we utilize here in Rochester as well is the work in progress note. Anytime we have snow removal, as Eric mentioned, it's just a nice little notice out there that every pilot is supposed to see before they come to your airport, that you have some snow removal equipment out there. You can also use it for mowing, as you mentioned, another great source. So it should be a year-round type thing. Lots of options that you can pick under work in progress. We also use a prior permission required NOTAM. For us, our tower is closed from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. So if we're plowing snow during that time, which we oftentimes are, we'll have a prior permission required NOTAM. And that requires, people that want to operate at our airport to call us and give us notice. You can list a phone number in there and you can list a time. So if you want an hour notice, you want a half-hour notice, you can put that out there. It's a little bit of a layer of safety for us too, because, we're broadcasting on CTAF in the overnight hours with the tower not there. But it's still nice to have something out there so people know that you're actually on the airfield with your work in progress, and they're supposed to call you and let you know they're coming. Just another layer of safety for our guys. And then of course the NOTAMs for obscured signs and pavement markings, we'll issue that regularly during snow removal as well, because, depending upon the wet snow might stick to the side of a sign. Certainly if you have snow on your pavement, it's going to obscure your pavement markings. Those are two separate NOTAMs, and honestly it takes a little bit to issue those. In fact, I struggle with those myself. but they're great. They're a great tool for you as an airport operator. And then oftentimes we'll restrict touch and goes because, we'd all have 4 or 5 people out there cleaning the runway, cleaning the taxiway, ramps, or whatever. And if they're all holding short, for the 152 on a 5-mile final, it starts to become pretty inefficient. So we'll oftentimes, particularly, you don't have a lot of touch and goes during an event, but a lot of times the following day when we're on cleanup, we'll have touch and goes. I don't feel it's fair to, let a student pilot come out and pre-flight the airplane, get it all ready to go, only find out that, from the tower that we're not allowing touch and go. So we feel strongly about putting the NOTAM out, put a time on it. A lot of times they'll come out, they'll take off, they'll go to another airport or a practice area, and then come back. And by that time our NOTAM's expired and we're all cleaned up and they can do their touch and go. So one other thing that I see is the conditions not monitored option. I don't use that, or we don't use that here because we're always monitoring, but I do think it's a tool that you can use as an airport operator. I'm not super familiar with it, but I do believe you have to issue it daily. So maybe it's not quite as much of a benefit. I think you could put some of the facility directory, but I'm not sure that is the same as a NOTAM. In fact, I know that's not the same as NOTAM. So next slide, please. So, again, Eric went through this a little bit more in depth than I will, but, again, the contaminant determines the runway condition code. So, if you look at the contaminant in that left-hand column, that's all we as airport operators, in my mind, really are concerned with, is that first column on the left that talks about contaminants. We figure out what the contaminant is, you plug it into NOTAM Manager with the percentage, and it's going to spit out a number. And you don't have to really worry about anything else on that chart other than, you want to know that, if you put a 0 out there, it's going to pretty much shut you down. A 1 is going to kind of shut you down as well. So you just need to understand what those mean. But, we always struggled with the fact that, if I got a 1/4 inch of snow or I got 3 feet of snow, I'm getting a 3. And that's still the truth. But as Eric pointed out, if there's 3 feet of snow, or even, realistically 6 inches of snow, that's going to increase his takeoff and landing distance significantly. So, while we see a 3, he sees a 3 and a 6 and 6 inches of snow, or 3 and 1/4 inch of snow, a big difference. So, and then each third of the runway is going to get its own number. I'll tell you that 99% of the time, our numbers are all the same. So if we have a 1/4 inch of wet snow in the touchdown area, we're going to have a 1/4 inch of snow in the rollout, and we're going to have a 1/4 inch of snow in the midpoint. So it's going to be the same for us generally. I think we've probably had a couple situations where we've had different numbers in each third, but generally they're all the same. So examples there gave, I think, were more for, you could see, hey, here's how they could differ, but in reality, they're likely all going to be the same. Next slide, please. So pavement friction testing, again, this used to be really, really important when it was friction based, obviously. Now it's contaminant based, but still really important for us. 2 types of friction measurement devices, the decelerometers. You can have electronic or a mechanical decelerometer. The picture is our continuous friction measuring equipment. It's a wheel. It's really super simple to use, and I love the thing. It actually, you in the truck, you determine what speed you're going to go, what runway you're on, and what the contaminant is, and then you just drive the runway. So you don't hit the brakes, you don't stop, and it spits out numbers for each third of the runway for you. And while we don't report those numbers and really aren't allowed to report those numbers, they're a great tool for us. I'll talk a little bit more about it when I talk about ICE, but we use that. I think last year I downloaded, we did 3,000 checks last season, I think. And again, we still value or monitor that because it's really valuable to see where the airport or where the runway is moving. Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? And you can see it with that wheel before you can see it with your eye. Many of you may still use sand. We do a little bit. The FAA approved sand is more like flour, in my mind. Very fine, hard to keep on the pavement. And it really, and for those that are familiar with the new RCAM system, it really doesn't give you a lot of benefit. There's not a lot of there's not a lot of upside to sand other than, real world helps the friction, but it doesn't really help you on your RCAM and your field condition much at all anymore. So we don't use a lot of sand as much. We use more chemical probably than sand, but it doesn't mean that it's still not a valuable tool for the rest of you out there. Next, please. So snow. We have dry snow, wet snow, we have slush. So what I would do is, it's important to determine what type of snow it is. If it's dry snow, generally you could squeeze it together in your hand, let it go, and it will fall apart. If it's wet snow, you squeeze it together in your hand and it stays in a snowball. And if it's slush, you squeeze it together in your hand and water runs out. So that's kind of how we determine it. Obviously, temperature drives some of that too. But it's important to be able to, for your people to understand what type of contaminant they have. Certainly at our Part 139 certificated airports, we have a snow, removal time criteria for our critical areas, through our snow and ice control plan. I will tell you, and I understand, many of these airports that are listening today probably can't justify brooms, but I will tell you brooms are absolutely the best product for taking, best piece of equipment for taking off snow. We broom probably 90% of the snowfalls, and we only supplement the brooms with plows to remove the heavier snow. And certainly, the larger airports are moving to the multi-function types of equipment where there's a plow on the front, and a broom, a tow behind broom. So they're able to do both functions at the same time. Brooming just keeps the wheel tracks from getting pressed down into the pavement and keeps it at a much better runway. And then, one thing to consider too is emergency routes. If you have a gate that, you've talked to the local fire department that they should come through that gate, your mutual aid groups, you might want to take a look at that gate as well during inclement weather because, make sure that you don't want to be plowing that gate when you're trying to respond to an aircraft emergency. So just make sure those emergency routes are taken into account when you're doing your snow removal. And then snowbanks and signs, Eric touched on a little bit too. Make sure that, your banks aren't too high, wingtip clearances are good, your lights are visible, use that, we use that NOTAM for signs, and then we'll come out in the following days and clean the snow off from the signs if there's snow on them. So we can see them and they're available for the pilots. Next slide, please. So my favorite topic, ice. It would seem that ice is moving. The ice snow line, I guess, is moving further north, and I think many of my compadres in the northern part of the state would echo this, that it seems that they're dealing with ice when they never had to before. We've always had ice, and now it just seems like we have more. So probably one of the more challenging things for an airport operator to manage. I would tell you that removing as much as possible through mechanical means, whether that's a broom or a blade, either way, anything you could take off ahead of time before it freezes is going to be better. Certainly at an airport of our size, our snow and ice control plan says that we have to respond to ice immediately. We can't respond to it the next day or the next morning, or if it starts freezing rain at midnight, we're addressing it at that time. There's several FAA approved pavement deicers. We typically use E36 as our liquid, and then we use New Deal as a solid. I mean, Cryotech sells liquid and solid. They sell a product called MAC that's a solid. We've found New Deal to be a little bit better. Some airports, I'm sure, use urea. I honestly have never found, we switched over to chemical probably 3 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. I've never found any FAA approved urea. I know, maybe others have had more success. I do know that there are some more environmental concerns that come with urea. There may be some testing and sampling that's required through the MPCA, depending upon what size airport you are and how much urea you're using. So be aware of that. And then of course, no salt, at all on an airport, inside the fence. We don't even drive trucks that have salt and sand, anywhere near the airfield. We don't cut across, we don't drive the perimeter road, we don't do anything. So we're really careful to make sure that we don't, inadvertently drop a little sand somewhere, even if it dropped out of the back of the truck. So, one of the things that I was going to talk a little bit about ice in our world and in my world, I guess. So when I get a freezing rain event, and always, it seems like it's freezing drizzle the majority of the time, I'll go out with a friction tester, and I know that a wet runway in our case is about a 70. So when I do, I'll get a 70, 70, and 70 on the runway when it's wet. And as I'm getting freezing drizzle, and as that starts to turn and freeze a little bit, that number will decline, right? So maybe now I have a 60, whereas again, in the FAA wouldn't consider your runway compromised till it gets to 40. So when I see it hit 60, which is again, it's almost beyond human perception, but I can see it on the wheel. So I'll apply chemical, we'll put liquid down, and my number will jump back up into the 70s. And so oftentimes what we'll do during a freezing rain event is we'll continue to put chemical on there anytime that number dips to off of 70. And so we'll never even hit 40. And we feel that we use less chemical and we staying ahead of it in that regard, and provide a much better runway environment for the aircraft operators than if we let it get down to 40. So, and that's just what we do. It's not going to work for everybody. And there are several other options, obviously, for treating pavement and different approaches. I would tell you that you're kind of either anti-icing or de-icing, and those that want to be proactive and have an operational need to be proactive, pre-treating for ice is ideal. And if you know that you have to keep your runway from getting iced up, you should be out there when there's a chance of freezing rain, and either putting a liquid down, as we would do, or you could also put a solid down. I will tell you that, it doesn't come without risk, certainly the expense of putting that chemical down. On the second side of it, like I've had situations where, we thought we were going to get freezing rain. We applied liquid on the runway, so it makes the runway essentially wet. And then instead of ice, we got snow. Well, now instead of that snow blowing across, it's sticking to that chemical. Created a problem, but in the end, I still would put the chemical down with a chance of freezing rain and deal with it if we just got snow, because breaking that bond, getting that liquid down so that ice can't bond to your pavement is extremely important. Again, all operational need-based. Some won't have a need for that, some will. But if you can keep that chemical down to keep the ice from bonding to your pavement, that's ideal. And of course, most would realize as you try to, apply de-icer during a freezing rain event, if you can keep your chemical solution from getting diluted, it'll keep it from freezing. As you get more precip through, either rain or drizzle, you'll have to keep adding chemical to keep the solution strong enough that it won't allow that ice to form. Now, one thing I would say is if someone said, hey, I obviously it's going to be a struggle for us to afford either liquid or solid, much less both. Which one should I get? In my opinion, I would get solid. You buy it in the bags. You can get 50-pound bags. You can get it in the 2,200-pound bags that you have to load with a forklift. But you can put it in with a sanding truck. Apply with a sanding truck. You put it in with a forklift. Most people probably have a sanding truck that they can have. If they use one in the city, you can wash it out. Get the salt out of it, wash it out real good, and then apply the solid. And if you're not there when it rains and you get a 1/4 inch of ice, you could still apply that solid. It'll go down through the ice and break it up. If you try to apply liquid to ice that's existing and you didn't get a chance to pre-treat it all, it'll just sit on top of the ice. So that's why my recommendation, if you only had one option, would be to get the solid. And I always try to have a couple extra bags around here too. And I certainly got to take care of, Rochester's needs, but I would be willing to sell, at my cost, bags of, I actually sold some to Dodge Center a couple of years ago, so they could get some ice off their runway. So, and other things too, is the other airports you can get together and, we could all buy solid together. I think you buy 20 bags on a truck and you could spread that truck around, or have one central location. So it's cheaper that way, and you don't have to buy, you don't have to buy a whole truckload to make it work. So next slide, please. And this is my additional resources. Eric had a bunch up there as well. Just the field condition assessments that AC, and then airside snow removal for small airports. That's through the ACRP. NOTAMs, that's an order talking about NOTAMs, and then NOTAM manager. Again, that's probably one of the most important things. It looked like we had a fair amount of people that were already signed up, but it's a great tool, and I would strongly encourage you go in with NOTAM manager if you haven't already. Also, Catherine could put my contact information up. More than happy to try to answer questions. I certainly don't know everything, but I'm more than willing to talk to you about it, look into it, and try to help. So, and with that, next slide, I'll open it up to questions. I don't know how you want to do that, Catherine.
Great. Thanks, Kurt, and thanks, Eric. We do have one question in the chat box here for either of you. Has anyone ever used potassium acetate as an anti-de-icing chemical? MnDOT uses it on our stationary bridges and roadway systems.
So potassium acetate would be NaC, right? Is that, or no, that's sodium acetate. Potassium acetate. I don't know. Is that illegal? I'd have to Google it to see if it's even legal.
Yeah, I would completely defer that to you, Kurt. I am unfamiliar with that one.
I don't know, Mike, if you want to add to your question.
Honestly, I don't know if that's legal to use on a runway or not. I'm not sure.
Oh, Andrew said he can speak to KA or potassium.
Hi, everyone. My name's Andrew Fournier. I'm the operations superintendent here at Manchester Boston Regional Airport up in New Hampshire. So we use a combination of the potassium acetate, which is FAA approved KA. We get it from Cryotech. We'll also use sodium formate as a solid. They work awesome together. And then we use sand an awful lot because sand is $70 a ton and potassium acetate is $4.50 a gallon. So if you can put the sand down wet as well. Some of the trucks have those application methods. But as far as potassium acetate, yes, we use it a lot. It's a 50% diluted solution. It comes diluted from Cryotech, and we store 80,000 gallons on hand throughout the winter, and then we'll replenish as we use it.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Kurt, you had mentioned that you had like the NOTA manager set up with a practice site and then your official site that was published. Was the practice site something that you set up yourself, or did you call in and have the NOTA manager people help you with that?
Yeah, it's something they have as a tool. I mean, we were given access to it. It's not something we developed.
So anybody could.
I think when you start that process, they would give you access to it, the practice site.
Great. I know, Eric, you talked about, when you're reporting on the runway, you report the runway in thirds, the approach end, the mid, and then the departure end. What if there are non-pilots out there that are reporting NOTAMs? How should they know which end is the approach end of their runway and which end is the departure end of their runway on that given day?
I'm sorry, can you clarify? As a pilot, they're saying given a PI rep, is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Or,
when they're going to report the conditions of the runway and they're dividing it up into thirds, how might they know which runway end to start on?
Then basically, they would just have to identify it, landing runway 14 versus, going the opposite direction. So they would just say that, and the approach end was, braking action was medium, and they're not going to put an RCC code out. They're just simply going to say it was medium or kind of, from a pilot's perspective. We don't do RCC codes. And most of them would probably just say one for the whole runway. So braking action. The tower asks us, when we land somewhere, that's what we're going to let them know is how. And again, it's very subjective based on the type of aircraft. When you're flying a turboprops have the advantage of just pulling the props back and they flatten out. And that gives us great deceleration versus a turbojet. Business jet comes in. If they're not throwing reversers out there, they don't have any extra drag devices. So they really are relying on reversing. Or braking. So they're going to use a lot more braking than us as turboprops. So when we land, we have to always, for us specifically in our type of airplane, it might be good, but that still might be less than good for, say, a turbojet aircraft. So it's no matter what, you always have to take PI reps. It's informative and it can be, useful, but you always have to know what was given it. And we have the same thing when we're flying with icing conditions in flight. Who's giving the reports, how much de-icing equipment do they have? So hope that helps. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's
Melissa, I think what you're also from an airport operator perspective, you just have to figure out what runway is the active runway. So look at the wind, figure out what runway is the active runway, and then when you start your NOTAM process, the touchdown is obviously related to the to the active runway. Touchdown, we call it touchdown midpoint rollout in my world.
great. I appreciate that. Any other questions? Well, I appreciate everyone's time for this session. Catherine put some handouts and presentations within the chat box if you'd like to download those so you can use them in the future or have contact information. I know Kurt and Eric are always willing to help. Anyone who has any questions about this process, whether you're new to it or figuring out the nuances.
And I also put a link to our survey. So please, if you have a few minutes just to complete the survey, it really helps us with planning for future workshops. So especially if you're an airport manager, you're newer, we have a great Airports 101 series in the fall. So if you have any ideas, you're like, oh, I would love to know about this. If you want to know more about NOTAMs managers, or if it can be any topic that you'd like us to hold a training session on, please submit that in the evaluation. But yeah, if there is no other further questions, we have several others coming up. Actually, I'll put the link, hold on here, for the remaining sessions for you guys to see. So if you have time and you want to do some more, the link that goes straight to our education series.
Catherine?
Yes.
Dave Bunch with Red Wing. I've got a couple of questions here and a couple of comments, if I may. We found that we can use the AWAS to post NOTAMs. There's a process by which you can do it, and it's very, very handy for an immediate NOTAM to the pilots. They love the thing. You just have to remember to take it off when it's no longer current. If there's anybody that wants to know how to do that, as far as the Minnesota airports, I know you can do it. You can give me a call and I'll fax you the process. Also, NOTAM Manager, we can no longer access it through Internet Explorer. They've recently changed, according to the FAA, you can use Google Chrome, but Firefox and Internet Explorer won't access it, at least for us. I'm not sure if anybody else has had that problem. Friction testing. We have a Vericom decelerometer that we use to augment the friction testing. And that's very, very handy, especially on ramps and taxiways where you can use the friction measurement. That's all I've got.
Oh, those are great. Thank you. Any other comments or questions before we sign off here? I see it's 10:30.
Would it be possible for Dave to just send that link to you and then you could post it with the other attachments possibly after the fact? Is that something that's still possible?
I could
put stuff on through the AWAS?
Yeah.
If you wanted to email it to me.
Hey, Catherine.
Yeah.
Cassandra Isaacson with Mendot Aeronautics. This was great. Thank you, Eric. And if that same issue that Dave sent on, if AirTAP could capture, if anyone else has other issues that they'd like to identify, like the challenge with Internet Explorer versus Chrome and all of that, if you could capture that and send it to me, I'll follow up with FAA on it and see if there's something. I think that I understand those challenges as a state agency. When we transition, oftentimes to abandon things like Internet Explorer, and we forget about the impact it has on local government. Local government doesn't always renew their IT systems as quickly as the federal government or state government would. And I think that FAA might be a bit unaware of that issue and how impactful it is to local government. And so, not promising anything, but we can certainly try to be a voice for that. If you could capture some of that and send it our way, we'd be happy to try to pursue it.
All right, Catherine, I'll send the AWAS information to you.
Okay, great. And I'll send it to everyone that attended today.
Okay.
Thank you, Dave.
Yep.
Thank you, Cassandra, for that input. Okay, well, out of respect for everyone's time, until we meet again, hopefully it's next week. Again, thank you. Fill out the survey and we are here for you guys. So I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks again for joining us today, and thank you and for putting this on, you and Melissa. We really appreciate it and setting all this up for us. So thank you.
Yes, and I forgot to thank Eric and Kurt and Melissa.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.